Hello and welcome to the webinar, the Global Reviews webinar, where we're going to discuss tapping into the unmet demand in your existing customer base. So firstly, thank you for everyone that's made the time to jump on the webinar. I know as busy sales and service contact centre leaders, you're not sitting around with your feet up on your desk waiting for us to come along and fill up your day. So thank you very much for making the time to come along. On the right-hand side of your screens, you'll see a control panel, and in that control panel, it gives you the ability to ask questions. So please fire through as many questions as you can. We'd love to hear your questions. We'll attempt to answer some of them depending on how we go time-wise during the webinar. If we can't answer your calls, then what we will do is we will follow up afterwards and make sure that we've answered your questions. So let's kick it off. My name is Peter Grist and I represent two companies, one being Global Reviews and the other Grist Consulting Group. Global Reviews is a benchmarking company that measures the lead indicators of sales and service success by benchmarking and actually assessing actual sales and service behaviours. While Grist is a change management consultancy that helps organisations develop integrated change programs that ensure that frontline sales and service behaviours are aligned with a company's business objectives. And what we'll be doing today is leveraging experience from both of those organisations in the webinar. The key objectives for the webinar are to enable you to start the conversation in your business about the unmet demand in your customer base. We want to make sure that we can help you put some data around the size of the opportunity and help you with some insight in how you could do a return on investment that you might achieve if you were to go after this unmet demand. And we also want to give you some ideas about how to go about tapping into this unmet demand, and particularly talk about the sorts of capability that your people would need if you want them proactively initiating more conversations with your customers. The research that we'll show as we go through is primarily based on service calls, where we're looking at opportunities to leverage from service calls into sales calls. However, you can use the same approach if it's a sales call that you would like to leverage either into a lead or into another sale at that particular time. We're planning for the webinar to take around 30 to 40 minutes, and I'd like to encourage you, as I said earlier, to fire in any questions and we'll endeavour to answer them. But prior to getting into the detail, I'd like to give you some background about where all of this started. And it really started with conversations both at Global Reviews but also Grist Consulting Group when we're out there with our clients about what is the future role of contact centres in a multi-channel world. So whilst everyone accepts that servicing a customer online is an order of magnitude more cheaper than it is to service them through a contact centre, that's common knowledge. Then you start to answer your question then, why would we bother with a contact centre in the future? And what is it that a contact centre can do that the web and mobile can't? And what is the real value of this unique value proposition of the contact centre? So if I just flick through, sorry, I'll just get my technology working. Flick through to the following slide. What you'll see there is really a high-level summary of when we've asked these questions of all of our clients about what do they really see as the difference between web and mobile and contact centres. And what you'll see there is, web is very much seen as it's very convenient, allows people to compare, provides lots of information. It can be very reactive, and it's really good for those sort of more transactional type inquiries that customers have. And not surprisingly, the contact centre is seen as very good at engaging with customers, building more trust, seeking to understand, but also being proactive and the ability to add value based on understanding and trust and engagement. Now, I wouldn't think that anyone on the line would see that as rocket science, what I've written down there. But probably what is a bit more surprising is the question at the bottom of the slide, which actually asks us about, how often do our contact centres actually deliver on what is the unique value proposition of the contact centre. So when I ask that of a lot of leaders in contact centres, most of them are very willing to admit that whilst we understand the true value a contact centre could bring to the customer interaction, in many, many cases, or in most cases, we actually don't bring that to the table. And as a result, we end up in contact centres providing very reactive and transactional type experience, which in the future can be and will be dealt with more cheaply online. Now, please don't take this as us saying that we think contact centres don't have a future and we should close them all down. We absolutely believe, and the research backs us up on this, that there is a huge role for contact centres to play in the future. However, we only see a role for them if they can actually differentiate themselves from something that can actually be delivered more cheaply via an online channel. So that really leads us to the key proposition, which is for contact centres to remain relevant to the customers and organisations. They will need to become better at leveraging their unique value proposition, and particularly in proactive and value adding. So that conversation and that thinking led us to what we're going to call the elephant in the room. And thinking about the best way that we could demonstrate the value of a proactive and value-adding contact centre. And you know, this really comes through, as much as we absolutely want to delight our customers, in the end, if we're going to make a business case, what is the most tangible thing that we can look at that would help a business case stack up for us to do more proactive value-adding with our customers? And that really comes through cross-selling and upselling. And the reason that I've called it the elephant in the room is that when we have conversations with people, everyone knows that there is significant unmet demand in their customer base, but we find very few people that are really working hard to actually uncover it. And if you go back to Marketing 101, it tells us that it's around 7 times more expensive to acquire a new customer than it is to sell more to an existing customer. So everyone knows that it's there and it's significant and there's a demand for it, but very few people that we see are attempting to capture it in a systematic way. And the key question here is, why is that? Well, one of the reasons that we found is that people and leaders are unable to actually quantify what is the true opportunity that we're trying to capture here. So when I ask contact centre leaders, what is the unmet demand in your customer base, more than often the response is silence for a while, followed by some umming and ahhing, and then an admission that, gee, I don't know it, but I really would love to know that. And so what we're thinking is, well, if you don't even know what the size of the opportunity is, then how can we actually start to make a business case around the fact that we should be trying to do more work to not only delight our customers, but to generate more revenue. So we set out to really have a look at, well, what was some of the underlying research that was out there about how upselling or cross-selling, value-adding is received by customers. One of the best bit of research that we came across was from the Forum Research Company in the US, and they did a study in the US, Canada, UK, Australia and Singapore. And what it showed, that rather than customers being averse to proactive value adding, it actually showed that 88% of customers value consultants who suggest alternative products that better meet needs. 73% of customers are interested in learning about new products or services a company is promoting. And 42% of customers are open to purchasing additional products and services based on those conversations. So that absolutely tells us that there is a willingness and a desire from customers to have a proactive and value-adding approach taken when they're actually ringing in based on service calls. Now, another aspect that I'd bring you to, a bit of research that I'd like to highlight here, is from Bain, who are seen as one of the leaders in the concept of Net Promoter Score. And the research that they've found is that a customer is 37% more likely to be a promoter, or a 9 or a 10 on an NPS scale, or just, if we're not talking about NPS or Net Promoter Score, then to just be an advocate for your company and your brand. They're 30% more likely to be a promoter if they receive more than they expected. So what this tells us is customers actually like it. We know that there's a revenue upside. So based on this research, proactively adding value has the potential to drive both customer and revenue outcomes at the same time. And it really begs the question as to why aren't organisations doing more of it? And to really answer that question, I think we've really got to go back to why contact centres were set up in the first place. And largely they were set up to take cost out of the business. They had a lower cost to serve than definitely bricks and mortar. And they were set up as a cost constraining measure for the organisation, and have since then been run very much on primarily on an operational metrics that are based on controlling the cost. But this starts to have real impacts on the actual culture and the underlying way that contact centres are set up. So just as an example, if we're telling an agent on a daily basis to control their AHT, how would we expect them, or why would we expect them to initiate extra conversations with a customer? So that is just a very simple example of how the way we've run and set up contact centres in the past actually inhibit us from proactively adding value to our customers. And of course there's other things like grade of service, there's the capability of our people and the confidence as to whether they've got what it takes to actually initiate extra conversations. And then I'd also ask you to think about the underlying culture in your actual contact centres. So about 8 years ago, I went to a workshop which was with Telstra in a large regional town, and the workshop was about how we could add extra value to customers. And prior to the session even starting, a middle-aged lady that had been with Telstra for 23 years, she walked in, she walked straight up to me in front of all the rest of the group. She said, "I was employed 23 years ago when people used to dial 101 to find phone numbers, and I love servicing customers, but if there's anything about selling to customers in this workshop, then I'm walking out straight away." So you can see that in that contact centre, it wasn't cool to be adding value to customers. However, we did work with Telstra, and we had a 300% lift over a 6-month period in the cross-sell and upsell activity that was happening in that particular centre. So we absolutely can capture this opportunity and confront some of the cultural aspects that are not reinforcing what we might like people to be doing. All of this led us to how can we actually help organisations understand the potential in their customer base better, and it led us to developing this tool which you'll see on your screen, which is a cross-sell opportunity funnel. Now, this tool is part of a broader sales service-to-sales benchmark that organisations use to quantify the unmet demand in their customer base and then to map out how they're going to go about actually capturing it. We developed this funnel by listening to a sample of recorded service calls and assessing how often agents demonstrate particular proactive and value-adding behaviours. The data that you can see on this page is based on all of our research across banking, telco, utilities, insurance industries. And I'll just talk you through how the funnel works. So little arrow at the top there indicates 100% of calls coming in. But what we found is that it's only on about 85% of those calls that we think it's appropriate to try and have a value-adding conversation. And that's defined by, first of all, being able to resolve the customer's initial inquiry, and then secondly, whether the customer has indicated that there is any time pressure. And so we only find that that happens in about 15% of cases. So if you're thinking about, say, a banking inquiry where someone's in a real hurry and they've forgotten their password and they need help, then we would see that it's inappropriate to be wanting to hold them up and to actually have a cross-selling conversation. But the good thing is it shows that in 85% of cases there is an opportunity for us to have a conversation with the customer. The next level down is where what we do is we listen to the calls, and we're listening for when customers actually give us triggers that for that particular industry could be used as a trigger or a way of initiating another conversation. Now, what I'll say here is that 22%, that is just based on the standard way of handling a service call, which currently is very operational and transactionally focused. So we do believe that 22% could be a lot higher if we had higher skilled agents that were opening up the conversation around the initial inquiry. But as it currently stands, when we listen to the call, 22% of times customers volunteer something that could be used as a trigger to initiate a value-adding conversation. Now this could be I'm about to go overseas. It could be that we've just had another child, could be teenage children. It can be anything that indicates that there's a lifestyle change happening for the customer that means to us that we can talk to them and potentially offer them a better solution. So you'll see then the next level down, what percentage of agents actually initiate conversations. You'll see we're sitting at about 11%. Now this is 11% of the 85%. So around, if you're talking about 100 calls, out of those 100 calls where it was appropriate to have a conversation, probably only about 9 times do we actually initiate conversations. The next level down is, so we've initiated the conversation, but does the agent actually attempt to really generate a lead or to try and close out a sale if you had universal agents? And you'll see there that that comes down to 7%. If we're talking about securing a lead for another part of the business, then you'll see that average leads are running at around 3%, and we applied just a basic 50% conversion from lead to sales to come down to a 1.5% outcome. So what you'll see there is, in summary, is that if you look at that funnel there, out of the 85% that we could have had a conversation with, only 1.5% have actually fallen through to a sale or an outcome that we'd like to have. Now, that's all very good from a data point of view, but let's now look at how that actually rolls out or rolls up or down if we want to look at how that might impact you from a revenue point of view. So the case study that I've got here is a case study based on an insurance company. The insurance company takes 400,000 calls over a particular period of time, and we've used the same percentages as what we saw on the previous slide, which indicate the current state out there in an average contact centre. Out of the 400,000 calls, 340,000 or 85%, we think it's appropriate to have a conversation with. And then out of that, 11% of those fall through. So even just going through to how many conversations do we initiate, you'll see that we're down to 37,400. Using the conversion rate, we end up at 23,800, where we've actually asked them for a lead or tried to secure an outcome. We've only secured 10,000 leads, and we've only had 5,100 successful sales. Out of 400,000 calls, all we've ended up with is 5,100 actual sales. Now, based on an average revenue per sale, which is particularly pertinent to this insurance company, the total cross-sell upside is just over $1 million. So the next case study is really based on what's possible. Now, if we were able to lift these conversion rates between each level of the funnel, and you'll see there I'm just putting the arrow on them there, what would that mean with regard to how many sales would actually drop through? If we could actually initiate conversations with 50% of our customers, you'd see that we'd end up with 170,000 conversations. And we could then, sorry, I've just gone one slide too many. Then if we could lift from 64% of our agents who actually ask and really attempt to generate a lead after they've initiated the conversation, if we could drive that up to 75%, we'd end up with 127,000 attempts to generate a lead. And then if we could lift from 43% our conversion between the lead and securing the lead even up to 50% by increasing capability, we'd have 63,750 leads. And just applying the same conversion rate around the conversion from the lead to the sales outcome, this would lead to 31,000 sales opportunities. Now, if we apply the $200 average revenue per sale, then you can see the dramatic difference that we've got there between 1 million and 6 million on the bottom of the screen with the revenue upside. So obviously, to do a full ROI on what you'd be willing to spend to try and capture this opportunity, you'd need to understand the impacts on your particular contact centre with regard to things like average handling time, training and development, and potentially reward and recognition, where you might have to provide more incentives for people and pay out a little bit more money in order to get them to demonstrate some of these proactive and value-adding behaviours and sales skills. So what I'd then like to go on to is to point out that while we've done this particular case studies here based on a very generic example, which is all calls that are coming into a contact centre, when this gets particularly insightful is when you actually start to do these funnels on the different inquiry types that are coming into your organisation. Because we're not saying that immediately you would go out of this webinar and say that we're going to capture every opportunity that presents itself. But what we are saying is you can do some research which tells you which are the easiest opportunities to capture and which have the biggest bang for their buck that you could actually go after by starting out when you're starting out on this journey. And that's the concept here of the low-hanging fruit. Which particular inquiry types are the easiest for you to upsell? This will be partly to do with your product suite, whether you have a large range of products. It might be that you choose to start with only upsell conversations because they're more closely related to the initial inquiry and customers can see more relevance in upgrading a product they currently have rather than jumping across to a product that they don't currently have that you could provide. So the real point of this slide is to strongly encourage you to take quite a targeted approach to how you set out to start to capture this opportunity, and don't try and start with all, because that, in our experience, can lead to consultants who don't have the capability or the confidence trying to attack every opportunity, which can have some major impacts on both your AHT and also your customer outcomes and how they might view the quality of the conversation. The next part of the webinar is I'd like to really talk you through some of the approaches that you can take, starting from the most basic to a more sophisticated approach to capturing opportunities in your customer base. I'm going to start with the concept of generic triggers. Now, this is where, following the resolution of the initial inquiry, what we're saying here is you don't have to do anything more to what you currently do with regard to resolving the initial inquiry. You keep doing that exactly the same. But the generic approach is to ask your consultants and your agents to start conversations with things like, were you aware that we've just introduced a new, would you like me to add that to your policy? Very good for upsell type conversations, say hire car on an insurance policy, things like that. Perhaps some extra functionality around a broadband plan, say upping the usage for perhaps a discounted price, those sorts of things. And then really just asking, well, would you like to talk to someone about that? Now, this is a very, if you look over on the right-hand side, talking through the pros and cons, the pros of this is it's simple and it's cheaper to implement, so it doesn't really take too much development of your agents and your consultants to get them to do this. The other good thing about this approach is that it's easier to turn on and off. So if you're in a contact centre where your grade of service is being impacted by particular call volumes, then you might decide that this is something that you don't do right now, but when the call volumes go down, then you'll actually have a campaign where you'll want to talk to your customers and you'll be happy to take a little bit more AHT in those particular circumstances. The cons, it's not particularly customer focused, and if it's not done well, then it may not drive the improves in customer numbers that you might be hoping for. Agents and customers can see it as a sales push. It does tend to require incentives to get people to continually keep doing this, particularly if you don't have a very customer-focused culture in your business. And it tends to lead to lower quality leads where the customer might not be as engaged in the lead as what you might like. So it's ideal for new products and services with a low price point. Works pretty well for an upsell conversation because you're not asking the customer to make a huge leap into a totally new product. And it can work very well for seasonal activity where for one reason or another you might want to have a particular conversation with a customer at a particular time of the year. The next option we're talking about is a slightly more complex option. Still doesn't require you to be doing anything different in the resolution of the initial inquiry other than to be actively listening for things that the customer says. Now, this approach does require some development of the agents such that they understand what a trigger actually is and they can listen and identify them. And then the conversation starts in a more customer-focused manner with along the lines of, you mentioned earlier, we have an option that ensures that if that happens again. So it's really about understanding the customer said something that you think we can actually offer a benefit, and getting that out early and trying to initiate the conversation by letting them know there was context. They mentioned something earlier and I think I could solve a problem for you. And then it's about going on in the same way that we were talking about before and really trying to secure an extra sale or secure a lead by asking if they'd like to talk to someone that's an expert in that area. Now, the pros here are that it's more customer focused. You can generate better quality leads. It can be positioned to agents as the right thing to do by customers because we are actually picking up on something the customer said and trying to solve a problem that they've actually highlighted or potentially have. The cons on the negative side is it does require more development of the agent. It's also ideal for new products and services. It works for the upsell very well, but you can use it for the cross-sell, particularly if we've identified a problem that the customer has communicated to us and we're offering to solve that product with a totally new product. And once again, this can be used for seasonal activity. This approach is not so easy to turn it on and off. To develop your people to really proactively recognise customer triggers and act on them is a skill that takes a while, and if you turn it off, it tends to take quite a long time to develop that capability again. And finally, wanted to talk to you about an advanced approach, and this approach does really take quite a lot of development of your consultants and agents. And what we're talking about in the advanced approach is where you actually take a different approach to resolving the initial inquiry. And what this requires is the consultant to, number one, to be very engaging on the at all parts of the call where you're resolving the initial inquiry, but also to position to the customer that they're going to have a broader conversation with them that is aimed at resolving the initial inquiry. So the customer sees the extra conversation that they're having as related to resolving the initial inquiry, and they love it. But of course, what that means is the more we get the customer talking, the more we're generating customer triggers that allow us to take a much more customer-focused approach after we've resolved the initial inquiry. So this approach does take a different approach. It requires different capability in the standard servicing part of the call. But following the resolution, then it's along the lines of the previous slide. You mentioned earlier we have options that we think could help you and take away whatever that issue or add value. It might be, you mentioned earlier that you're going overseas. We have some options that ensure that our customers have access to the cash at any time when they're overseas. Can I ask you some questions to make sure that when you do go away on your holiday that you can be certain that you'll have the cash you need? So it's really about having a more customer-focused, systematic approach to generating a cross-sell opportunity that starts right from the start of the call. So the pros for this is it's extremely customer-focused, and we know customers love it, and it drives really good customer scores and outcomes like NPS and customer satisfaction. It gives you, if you are still talking about leads and not the agent provisioning the sales straight away, it gives you the highest quality leads and it gives you more leads. It's very much easier to position this as the right thing to do by the customer with your agents, and the other side benefit is that it gives you better resolution of the initial inquiry. So it's interesting when we've actually implemented some of these specific strategies, we've actually seen AHT around solving the initial inquiry coming down because we're asking better questions and getting to a resolution sooner. The cons are that this requires highly skilled agents and it needs to be supported by a totally customer-focused culture within your organisation. It's not something that you can turn on and off based on when your greater service is at the right time, at the right position. It has the potential to increase your AHT, not on the actual service call component, but particularly if we get into really good conversations and discovery with customers around the secondary need. It's ideal for high-value products and services, great for upselling and particularly cross-selling, and it's certainly an approach that we would encourage market-leading companies who have higher-priced offers in the marketplace to take, so that they can certainly sell increased margin on their products by taking a very customer-focused approach. So they're some three options that you might look at, and which of those options you'll choose to take will be very much dependent on the work that you've done previous to this about understanding the size of the opportunity, whether you want an approach that you can turn on and off based on the queue demand from your customers, and also your brand positioning as well. So before we start to wrap up, I'd just like to show you another slide around this advanced cross-sell conversation. So this is a tool that we use to really try and understand what proactive behaviours are actually being demonstrated or not. And you'll see there that this just lays out a series of behaviours. How was the conversation actually triggered? Was it based on a customer trigger? So in an advanced cross-selling conversation, we'd expect that it comes from a customer trigger. The next level down is that you can have a conversation that's based on a more generic trigger. Did we actually bridge to the sales discussion about the secondary product? This is a key skill to get customers to understand why we want to have another conversation. So I'll give you an example of the power of a bridge to this discussion about the secondary product and how much of a difference it can actually make. So a reasonably common example, say in banking, is that you might be having a conversation with a customer, and through that conversation you hear that they are going through a divorce. Now, if you were a hard-nosed banker, you'd be sitting there thinking, woohoo, what a great opportunity I've got here. Lots of opportunity for us to actually sell lots more products to probably, hopefully, both sides of this equation, the husband and the wife, or each partner. But what we find is when we ask most bankers whether they would be prepared to initiate a conversation based on a trigger about a divorce, most of them run a mile. But saying something like, well, tell me all about the divorce is obviously not going to work. But if we actually said to someone, and this is a bridge to a sales discussion, is, look, when we were talking earlier, Mr. Customer, you mentioned that you were going through a divorce. Did I get that right? And the customer would say yes. And then we would follow up by saying, well, look, one of the things I know by dealing with customers who are in a similar situation is that when they're going through a divorce, it can be quite a trying time, but also, can mean that there needs to be some major changes to the way you go about your banking. Now, would you mind if I took a moment to ask you a couple of questions about how your banking needs to be set up in the future based on the divorce you're going through, so we can make sure we get that right for you? Now, you can see the power of the difference there, and that's the sort of sophistication we actually want to develop with consultants and agents if they're going to be involved in this advanced cross-selling conversation. So just a small example of some of the elements of this tool. The tool also goes on to look at whether we actually ask more questions, are we able to clearly link solutions to the customer's specific needs, and how we generate leads. This is a tool that certainly I'd ask you to use if you like, but we can also provide you some assistance. So that's the major part of the webinar. What I'd see as some key takeaways that I'd just like to talk you through is, firstly, to try and calculate the revenue and the customer upside. There's really no point having the conversations inside your organisations if they're just based on gut feel. You need to quantify, the unmet demand that is actually in your customer base. So analyse the various call types using the cross-sell opportunity funnel. And then decide on the value-adding approach that suits your people, your customers, your product and your brand. So those were those last three slides we went to. How much effort are we actually prepared to put into changing the way our people do things in order to take advantage of these cross-sell and upsell opportunities? And it might be that you say, look, we've got a very simple product which is a low-value upsell on a lot of call types that we have right now. We're going to take a very simple approach where we resolve the initial inquiry, and then we just ask a customer if they're aware about some of the aspects of our new product. And that's fine. Or you might say, no, we are really going to make sure we nail all these opportunities, and we're going to take a more advanced approach, which will mean us developing our people. All of those things need to be taken into account when you're calculating the cost. Developing your people. Please do not underestimate how hard it is and how deeply ingrained into a lot of elements of your culture this service-only mindset might be, and how hard that might be to change. And then, of course, there'll be the operational costs that you'll need to look at as well. And then after you've done that, and if the ROI calculations come out that you think it's worthwhile. Sorry, the other thing that should be on this slide is you absolutely need to understand what will be the impact on your customer satisfaction or NPS measures, and you'll actually have to work out how you're going to put a value on those if you really want to do a genuine return on investment calculation. And then finally, we suggest that you ring fence this with a particular team and some particular call types, and you run a pilot and you prove the hypothesis and the return on investment. So that's the end of the webinar, the formal case of it. I must admit I have had having some problems with getting questions through. I know there were some questions earlier, but I've got a bit of a technology problem on my end and I can't currently see those questions. But what I can assure you is that every question that's come through, we will know who it's come from. We will come back to you with an answer. If you have any more questions, then the slide that I'm on right now is Leonardo Orantes, who's our commercial director and helped set up this whole webinar. His telephone number and email address is all there for you to look at. And then finally, I'd really just like to close off by saying if you need any help with any aspects of what we've discussed today, we'd only be too happy to discuss that with you. We'd be more than happy to come out and spend an hour basically going through this webinar with your organisation. We could do it in a more interactive sense in that case. If you had a group of people that you think it'd be worth us coming out and having a conversation with for a while, we'd be more than happy to do that. So I hope that the webinar has been helpful for you today. I do believe that this unmet demand in our customer base is the elephant in the room for service contact centres, and that if we aren't able to capture a lot more of this potential, then we leave ourselves open as contact centres as being basically in direct competition around reactive and transactional service, and we all know where that can be done more cheaply in the future. So thank you very much for attending, and I will sign off now. Thank you.